And let me give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His wisdom has decreed that, the physical structure of men and the way they're created provides for them a greater ability for them to work, for them to go out in the world and do physical tasks and to, stuff which would, activities which are necessary in order to develop economies and societies and so forth. And so therefore, since they are the ones who are engaging these tasks, and they're the ones who, in terms of human terms, would be bringing in, the money and the commerce, so therefore they had the responsibility the same to become in charge of the household, to take care of the household. And then the members of the household would then be under their administration, under their guidance and so forth. And so as part of the, since they had this obligation, they achieved a right that, this right was that they would be able to, they would be given obedience in their household. And this is something natural. In the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed, has created in women a greater, in their constitution, the ability to give birth to children, and all they have to go to in terms of giving birth and raising the children. And so therefore, since they have this great obligation upon them, and they were best suited for this in the way that Allah created them, they also, in return, got the greater right where the obedience of the child is to his mother first before his father. I mean, that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, when he was asked by one of his companions, whom should I befriend in this world? And the Prophet ﷺ said, your mother. Then he asked again, he said, your mother. Then he asked again, he said, your mother. And then he said, your father. So in both examples you find that, the males have, because the way Allah created them, they had certain obligations, so in turn they received certain rights because of that. And women had certain obligations because of the way Allah created them, and so they got also, because of those obligations, they got certain rights and were awarded certain rights because of that. And this is all from Allah's wisdom. One cannot say that one is good, as I said, or evil, but that rather this difference is there and is needed in order for life to continue, life to exist. In the same way that if it was only nighttime, no life would exist on earth. If it was only constantly dark. And likewise, if it was constantly sunlight, life would not exist on the earth. And so therefore, both sexes are, have a complementary role. And if we understand this from the basic principle, then all the different regulations in Islam where men and women differ is based upon this notion of fulfilling their roles and their obligations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has disposed or discharged to each group. And to stand up and to find question with that is really to find argument and to find question with Allah, the Creator Himself. I mean, it would be the same way as for somebody to question as to why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create him of this color, or why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create him of this height, or gave him these many years to live, or gave him these type of physical characteristics or qualities. These are all things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does out of His wisdom, and He shows no injustice to His creatures, but rather He dispenses from His merit and His blessings as He wills. And therefore, in these matters, to find a problem with it is to really, in the end, although people might not necessarily see that when they look at it from a very, just take a quick glance at it, but if you really contemplate it, you find that in the end, people are taking, argument with Allah Azza wa Jalla as to why did He create it this way, why did He command it these ways. And as we know, He is our Creator, He commands us, and He questions us whether we fulfill His commands, and we are His slaves and His servants. We do not question Him, but rather we are to submit to His commands and to His orders. Now, with this sort of introduction to the topic, it is important to understand that at the same time and recognize that throughout the Muslim world, one does not find the teachings of Islam with regards to women applied, but rather one finds women in a very bad state, and this is undeniable. One cannot deny this. And if somebody was to ask me why, I mean, I would answer very clearly that in the Islamic world, all the rights are not observed. I mean, whether it's the rights of Allah Azza wa Jal, that only He should be worshipped and He should be obeyed, you find the society is not fulfilling those rights. And whether it's the rights of fellow Muslims one to the other, they're not also observed. And when it rights to the plants and to the animals and so forth are not observed either. So what happens is when a society does not observe its rights and does not check injustice and check tyranny and spread justice and decency amongst the members of that society, the strong end up devouring the weak. And typically in societies, women and children, the aged and so forth, are weak members of the society. So therefore the onus or the great burden of injustice, then comes upon them in a disproportionate manner. And so therefore it's, when one looks at the injustice meted out to women in the Islamic world, one should understand that this is not something which is unique to women. I mean, injustice and tyranny and the lack and the respect of rights and each other is something which the Muslims as a whole, as a society, as a culture, as a civilization, have lost. And so therefore, you have a situation of where the strong devour the weak, and since the strong devour the weak, the weaker members of the society, like the elderly, like the poor, like women, like children, anybody who doesn't have the ability to cause himself injustice, then becomes a recipient of injustice and faces much turmoil in their lives. And with that, it's important that we also, to conclude, that when addressing this topic, because it is a topic which is raised, and you can't go to any bookstore so you find a lot of books, or you can't, a week will not pass unless there be some television program or some, newspaper article or magazine article talking about women in Islam and how women are being treated injustice. The way to approach this is not to approach it in a apologetic manner, but the way to approach it is that one should see really how the reason as to why this occurs. That now the movement in the West is to wipe out any difference between men and women. That's a reaction for the extremism they had before when they considered women not to be full human beings. And that in Islam, we recognize the full humanity of both, and at the same time we recognize that each have their own roles based upon the way Allah created them and commanded them. And that not necessarily means that one is better than the other. Moreover, it is important to understand that when these voices are being raised for a reinterpretation of Islamic thought and so forth, one has to be very careful as to what is really behind that. A lot of it is really just taking the notions of Western feminists and just trying to find some sort of Islamic, cover to it in order to pass it off between the Muslims. And finally, if somebody was to say that, what is the proof that Islam is better to women? You argue that, you say that your Quran teaches you that, you say that the teachings of your Prophet Muhammad ﷺ teaches that, but we don't find any distinction between the women of your societies, Muslim societies. In fact, we consider them to be worse off. How would somebody respond to that? Well, one would respond to that by saying the greatest evidence is history itself. The greatest evidence is in if we're to look at, what has Islam brought to women as opposed to what has other civilizations brought to women. If you look at history, historians will tell you that humanity has seen about 15 or 20 civilizations. They differ in terms of their numbers. In all the civilizations, you do not find women having any role per se in the development of that civilization. For instance, if you look at the great events of our time in the American Revolution. The American Revolution we have the founding fathers, for instance. The French Revolution, we have certain French philosophers, Rousseau and others. You look at the ancient Greeks; they're all male philosophers. You look at any of the ancient Chinese, the ancient Japanese, the Hindus, and so forth. Any of these civilizations, you do not find women having any role in it. In fact, if you were to look at some of the books that are that you can find in the public bookstores and so forth, like the history of the world from a women's point of view and so forth, you only find in the last 50 or 100 years. They give you the history of women for like, the last 4,000 or 5,000 or 7,000 years of recorded history, and then there's nothing for, the first, 6,500 years. Then only like in the last 150 years, do you find events? Well, this woman, she became a doctor, and this woman was like elected for office, and she discovered this and so forth. So what it means is that for them, in their whole civilization, there was nothing in any part of the world which really affected women. Women were just really passive objects of all those civilizations.